Welcome to Pay Attention, interviews about truth in troubling times. Today, my guest is Diana Johnstone. And Diana Johnstone, Ph.D., is an independent journalist and truth seeker who has published 3 books and many articles and essays, especially in alternative journals and newspapers like Counterpunch, Consortium News, and In These Times. For most of her long career, Dr. Johnstone has been living in Paris and writing about European and Western politics and peace movements. Her most recent book is a memoir that inspires those of us who continue to hope against all odds to endorse humans and humanism in our societies. Diana Johnstone is a lifelong political progressive who has dedicated her work and writing to the causes of world peace, social justice, and rational debate within a progressive democratic framework. She supports principles of free speech and individual rights, as well as programs for closing the wealth gap, overcoming poverty, enhancing developing economies, and ending aggressive wars among the most powerful nations on earth. I find the views of Diana Johnstone to be refreshing and informative on so many levels. Reading her memoir, Circle in the Darkness, Memoir of a World Watcher, was both deeply satisfying and profoundly upsetting. I've had my eyes opened about what has been happening to progressive politics in the US and Europe since at least the 1980s. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you again, Diana, and I welcome you very much to Pay Attention interviews.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, my pleasure to speak with you and hear you.
Well, it's lovely to be able to talk to you because I feel I have such a resonance with your mind. And today we're going to talk about a topic that I think many people are not very well informed about, and that's transhumanism and transsexuality, the way they interface and how they, let's say, have a place within the sort of progressive or liberal politics, or at least media. And so before we even start, I want to give a definition for transhumanism because I find a lot of people either haven't heard it or heard about it, or they don't know what it is. So I'm taking this definition simply from Wikipedia. Transhumanism is a philosophical movement, the proponents of which advocate and predict the enhancement of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies that are able to greatly enhance longevity, mood, and cognitive abilities. Some transhumanists believe that human beings may eventually be able to transform themselves into beings with abilities so greatly expanded that the current condition, greatly expanded from our current condition as to merit the label of post-human beings. So the idea is that the human capacities would greatly expand to such a degree that we would no longer be classified as human beings. So that's in the actual definition. And of course, they're saying that that might happen, but it's certainly part of the movement. And if you read the transhumanist literature, you see that there's a sort of an advocacy for the singularity, for introducing artificial intelligence into humans' actual brains, etc. So that's the definition from Wikipedia. Is there something you wanted to say about that?
This is a document from the World Economic Forum. We favor morphological freedom, the right to modify and enhance one's body, cognition, and emotions. For people who haven't heard about this can be rather jarring.
Yes.
But obviously, the people who are planning this find it just great. And
yes.
Hard at work at it. And they are in very powerful positions and think that this is the future. And the fact is that they tend to be people who have much more influence than you or I.
That's right. That's right. And so maybe we should enter into our conversation first about just transsexuality and transgender politics, because I know I contacted you when I listened to an interview with Abigail Schreier about the dangers of teenage girls actually going through double mastectomies, hormone treatment, in order to change their morphology and attempt to look like and sound like they're male. So, a lot of us have been shocked, really shocked about how quickly this whole issue about being transgender or needing to confirm, your gender when your body doesn't look like that gender, that this has all come on board within a very short period of time. And before that, it was very rare that you would hear about anybody. We heard about people who were, trans, they're dressing in other clothes and so on. But it was rare that people wanted to do surgeries. And suddenly it seems as though there's a large portion of young people who have this so-called disturbance. And as Abigail Schreier points out, if it really were biological, it would be across all the age groups. And it is not the case. I mean, there really aren't people, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who's saying, I've been trapped in this body and I need to get to surgery. So, that just has happened mostly among people who are under 25. So I wonder if you can talk about what your thoughts are about how the politics around this came on board as part of identity politics.
I guess it starts out that I'm not alone in having been rather amazed at how quickly respect for, and more than respect, sort of obedience to transgender identities. You see, it isn't the business of very many people. I mean, even with this new fashion of wanting to change your gender or sex or something, it's a very small minority of population. And the question arises, how in the world can what looks like a small marginalized group have such influence that major institutions are enforcing their desires about how they should be treated and so on. And well, it just seems to me obvious that however active and militant transgender people may be, they just don't have the clout to enforce this. So then I start looking into things and realize, for instance, that they have huge support from major industries. And an instance of this is the famous World Economic Forum that has annual meetings at Davos, that gets together the top people in the world economy on the Western world. I mean, sometimes even elsewhere, in order to plan what are the good and proper investments, technologies for the future. Extremely influential, the World Economic Forum, and it's known for this great reset. There's a book by Klaus Schwab, the head of this organization, who's an engineer, the Great Reset, which, in other words, they are planning the fourth industrial revolution, no less.
Yes, and so how do you think transsexuality? So here's a question that I've had all along, like, yes, how does that fit in?
Well, yes, this is how it fits in. The thing is that it fits in because the type of technology that they mean to develop in this fourth industrial revolution is technology that will change the human being, as in your quote. And the fact is that changing little children from boys to girls or girls to boys is the first application of that type of technology.
Mm.
And so it is sold to the public as a human rights issue, which affecting little children. Now, this is designed in our present emotional value system to appeal to people. Little children, little boy wants to be little girl wants to be little boy. How can you say no to the little girl that wants to be a little boy? And well, of course you can say no.
Right.
I mean, a proper parent can say, well, dear, the fact is that you're a little girl, or the fact is that you're a little boy, and we'll see about, how long you have this desire. And
also, just to add that throughout history, children, particularly young children, they often pressed against their gender. Girls wanted to be tomboys, boys wanted to have babies. Little kids couldn't understand why they would have that constraint or limitation, and their parents would explain, this is because your body is like this, and you can't have a baby because you're a boy, and you can't do thus and so because you're a girl. Whatever thus and so was, it was always something, but it was different periods of time. But parents were never confused. They never were confused about what kind of child they have. Now parents are meant to actually just keep the question open. And some people are saying even on their birth certificate, they want to keep open the gender. To me, this is kind of crazy. Like, children actually want the adults to know something.
Well, this, I was watching a video of Stephanie Davis Arai, who worked on this subject a lot, and she made an observation that struck me as her. She's worked a lot also in parenting, communications with children, and she said she saw the merger of two factors contributing to this, and one is that parents are taught, because there's a lot of parenting advice. I mean, frankly, I was a parent, I figured it out for myself. And in relation to my child, there's a lot of advice of how you, and she said that there's this notion now that the child is a fully developed, formed personality when it's born. Yeah. And the parents' job is simply to help it express itself, which is all there.
Yeah.
And I think that is a profoundly mistaken psychology. That's profoundly wrong. The personality, the character of the individual develops. Now, of course, there's a confusion of nature and nurture. Of course, you're born with certain characteristics, certain tendencies, but who you are depends on how you react with reality and with other people with those, and you become the person, and you become a person year after year. You aren't born the full personality that has to express its full self.
Of course.
And this notion that the child is already complete and knows all about itself at 5 years old, I'm sorry.
I agree. And I also think I want to remind people that prior to about the 19th century, there was the idea that children were just little adults. Then we actually began to develop a knowledge of child development. There wasn't even the notion of childhood previously, because that's one reason why children were used for labor and for lots of adult jobs, because there wasn't the understanding that there is something called childhood in which their development has to be protected and guided, because they don't yet have the cognitive or the emotional abilities to guide themselves. They can't reason, they can't know about their future selves, they can't make hypotheses about, well, if I do this, what would happen? If I don't do this, all of that develops. So, when you're 5 years old, what you really want to feel is that the adults around you know what's going on and can take care of you and can tell you what's going on. When you're 5 years old, you don't want to be running the show because you don't know enough. and you feel vulnerable, you know. So the idea that parents are asking their children, it's as though we've gone back to the Middle Ages or whatever, where we think the children are adults. You know, that idea is a really, I can see how it's come along from the point of view that parents want to think that their children are so special, and such like little, unique flowers, and they have to bloom. But flowers and children are very different. Children take a long time, you know, to actually grow up.
And children have a lot of imagination. I mean, I remember when I was a child, I always wanted to play imaginary games. I would get other people together and we'd make us up a story and we'd be this and we'd be that. And of course, I would like to think that there were teeny little people living in the garden around the flowers. I also, for a while, I was an only child and I thought I had this companion Jane next to me, and you mustn't sit down there because Jane is already sitting there. I mean, parents, I think my parents never lied to me. They would understand my fantasies, but they never told me, oh yes, that's true. I mean, they didn't tell me about Santa Claus or anything. They never told me lies of any kind. And I got a huge respect for truth, I think a little bit because I came from a family of people who didn't lie to me.
Yes.
I think it's very important to be truthful with children, truthful about reality, and give them the boundaries of reality that they develop within.
Yes, exactly. The guidance from the adults actually allows the child to have a mind, because the child is really a kind of, like William James said, it's a kind of buzzing confusion of a lot of stuff in our subjectivity. And the child doesn't yet have the steps that are needed for reasoning, for understanding the world. But the child does have a really important imagination, and that's involved with play. But parents have always helped children play in an imaginary way, and then also follow rules, do what's necessary to take care of the chores, of the tasks that they're responsible for, and in the family. So this idea also that there is something called reality, and that reality is somehow connected to our biology, and the biology is a limitation. That reality of the limitation of our biology, a lot of people don't like it. We grow old and we die. People don't usually say that's great, but they learn to make meaning from it, to move through what that is, because that's in our nature. It seems like transhumanism really doesn't want to respect the idea of human nature.
No, absolutely not. It considers it an imperfect form that can be corrected by technology. And you see, technology has other qualities. It's just not going to work. We are mammals, for one thing. And you see, the notion is this whole, there's this huge confusion, especially in the left, about what is natural and what is socially determined. And a lot of people on the left say, well, gender identity is socially determined. It doesn't, but then they think it really has to be changed by technology. The social forms are not simply, I was reading this mad stuff about so-called Marxists. They call themselves Marxists, which you can call yourself anything after all. Marxist transcend, which is saying that, and this is a left kind of, this attitude exists, that the gender, it's all capitalist. Capitalism depends on the household and gender differences to function. And so we're fighting against capitalism if we eliminate gender. Now, this is total nonsense, because it's precisely capitalism right now that's working in that direction.
Yes, yes.
And
yes.
the fact is that the difference between men and women was not invented by capitalism. It's,
right.
It's in their nature. And,
right.
and the family is a result of the fact that it takes a man and a woman to create a child. And a civilized society gives a role to the father of the protector, who does not have the turmoil of bearing the child as the wife, the woman does, but who will protect. And so to say that patriarchal society, to say it's just based on the man exploiting and beating up and killing the woman, this is not a civilized.
No.
That in civilized societies, and I mean all kinds of civilized societies, there is a natural distribution of labor, which has nothing to do with capitalism. And this has existed for millennia. Various societies have different ways of organizing the family, but they all have to organize it somehow because it's in human nature. That's right. We're born that way.
And it has to do with the long dependency of the human child. The human infant is born in a very dependent state and needs a lot of attention. In fact, Winnicott, a psychoanalyst who was also a pediatrician, calls it the primary maternal preoccupation. And that's in the first 3 years of the child's life. Someone has to be preoccupied with the child. The child is so vulnerable. And then that child still needs many years to become an adult. So this long dependency of human children is the reason why families needed to be supported by societies. And societies always organized, however they did, their religion or their ways of working or whatever, to support the family, even if it wasn't just, that the very wealthy people had a different kind of family situation than poorer people. Still, throughout societies, there was support for this long dependency. And that's what produces a human being who actually knows how to function. That the idea that when you're 5 years old as a human being, you could drive on a superhighway, is everyone knows it's wrong. Nobody's going to argue that just because your child can get into a toy car, they could drive on the highway. So it seems very odd that this is a political issue, that there are people being instructed to follow their children's ideas about what they want to be, boy, girl, whatever, because, of course, when children are young, they've always pushed against their limits, and parents have always helped them be able to live within those limits. And then when they grow up, they can figure out what life is about, but they can't do it when they're 5.
Exactly. It goes along with a very extreme individualism of this rather ugly phase, I think, of capitalist society. It's a very, very competitive society, which is now especially competitive because it's polarizing. The rich are getting richer, and there's a tremendous growing gap, economic gap, and this identity politics comes along, and we forget all about the effort to improve economic equality, and instead the only concern is equity. And equity means having minority people and women and blacks and trans on the board of directors of the big companies. That's what it means, equity. Or in the army, you can run a rocket, system. You can drive a drone that will go bomb a wedding. Oh,
Mhm.
I'm a woman and I can do that. I should be very pleased that I now have the opportunity to go participate in mass murder. But what it is, it's room at the top. Identity politics is room at the top for members of these groups to get ahead. It divides society. It causes tremendous antagonism down below.
Right.
The antagonism between groups is growing.
Yes.
With this identity politics, because all you're supposed to think about is skin color, gender. These are just things you should not be thinking about.
Yes.
And these are just things you should ignore. I mean, and we're being told you mustn't use the wrong pronoun because it would offend. Look, for one thing, I have not consciously ever met a transgender person. If I did, I'd be polite as I am to anybody I meet. This is not a big issue for me or for most people. It just is not an issue at all. But I am concerned about what's being done to children.
Yeah. So I wonder, like let's say I agree with you very much that the ideas that are connected with this particular, say, cultural movement or political movement, they seem sort of mad. I mean, they seem peculiar and extreme. And the ways of talking about our biology also seem to be, I would say, again, peculiar or extreme or marginal or whatever. It doesn't make sense. However, there's got to be something that's going on because it's very widespread. I mean, it's everywhere. It's all over the world that there is this kind of conversation. I assume, I mean, I'm not in Asia, but, I know that there are people in Asia that have talked about this. But the idea that there's a spectrum of gender, that there's a spectrum of biological sex, and that there are something like 18 to 25 different genders. None of these things really make sense, and yet they're in the public narrative. So, how do they get there? I mean, is it all media, do you think? I mean, or how does that work?
Well, it's not all media because it starts, it's also at the university.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you have Judith Butler, who is responsible for a lot of this business about genders. I mean, she's a great prophetess of all of these genders. It's to my mind, it's totally absurd. Look, masculine and feminine, first of all, there's a physical reality. Yeah. After that, there are attitudes, behavior, which are, you could say, infinite. Mm-hmm. And you're not even going to put a number on that. I mean, somebody could be somewhat, how do you say, first of all, what is feminine and what is masculine? I mean, even that is questionable.
Yes. I mean, that's more like a cultural definition typically, because in some cultures it's this way and some it's that. And exactly. It's been
And so people have different inclinations, different combinations of behavior.
Right.
And to put labels on this is, I think it's demeaning. I don't think people should be being labeled like this. If somebody, I mean, how you want to dress, I don't care how people dress.
Right.
Of course, there are some occasions where, there's blah, 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 there's social, but this is not a big deal. Right. And this defining all these genders is navel gazing. It's really a way of, let's not look at the world, let's look at me. Let's look at how I'm not like everybody else. I have a special gender. There's a hell of a lot going on in the world right now. Do you realize there are military uh, exercises in the Black Sea that are provoking Russia. There's a there's danger of world war, of a world war with Russia. We're sending warships to China. There's all that PR people pay no attention to this. They take attention to what gender somebody is. Now, to my mind, this is just an immense distraction from what is important in reality.
So do you think that there's any intentional, again, to try to look at this, again, I mention to people all the time that we're on the verge of a serious war. And also there are many wars going on. The United States is at war in a lot of places. No one is talking about it, particularly on the left. Exactly. No one is talking about it.
And they're sanctioning people, sanctioning
they're sanctioning it, yes. And so instead they're talking about these kinds of identity politics that are, as you said, very marginalized and have to do really with a small number of people. And I agree with you. Who cares? I'm happy that people would do whatever style they want to do. I do think it's important that we understand what childhood is, and that we understand how children develop and why parents need to actually make decisions for their children. I think those are important things, and they need to be clarified again, apparently. But these other things, that we are being distracted. And of course, the COVID-19 was an opportunity also for people to be shut down and, be kept at home and also separated from gathering. So I feel like we're in a very confusing moment here, but I don't know what's causing it,
I think another factor is our values. I'm talking about the West because here I'm living in France. I'm hearing about NATO, the West, our Western values that we must impose on the rest of the world because our values are so wonderful. Our values change from generation to generation, but whatever they are, they're the right ones, and we should make other people follow them. And now LGBT has become LGBTQ,
right.
Has become a value that if other countries, this is another way we can criticize other regimes. And I was just watching a video from a woman in Vietnam who says that there's an attempt at a color revolution in Vietnam that's supported by the AID agency.
Really?
Based on LGBT rights. And you see, the funny thing is that it used to be that we were so right because the bad guys were communists. Now we're so right because the bad guys are conservatives. Ooh, wow. Yeah. And that's terrible. That's terrible. It was terrible to be communist, but now it's terrible to be conservative because the Russians are both, was one and the other. So they're Russians.
It's always the Russians.
Yeah. And so now we can, this is a way to try to destabilize, because the policy of the US, and it's using its allies in the European, is to change regime in Russia so that they can treat it the way they treated with Yeltsin. Go in there, buy what you want, give them orders. It ruined the country under Yeltsin, by the way. It was a disaster. And that's why Putin has made things better and has made so popular. But since they don't yet have exactly the same attitude toward LGBT as we do, all of a sudden, that's a huge global scandal that must be corrected, right? The Hungarians, it's the same thing. They don't have the same attitude. So this is the latest, what you could call imperialist value imposition.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize it was being imposed by AID. I didn't know that this issue around transsexuality and transgender was being exported by the US. I mean, I just haven't been on top of that one. I thought it was happening mostly here, but it's being exported now.
Oh well, the whole identity politics, the racial, you know, the whole package, identities, minority identities. Minority identities is now the way that the West, and especially the Americans, can stand up in the world and look, oh, we're better than everybody because we're worried about this. Of course, the fact is that a lot of the problems of race are greater in the United States than anywhere else.
Of course.
But doesn't, the Americans are going very self-righteously to France and telling the French that they're racist. Although they didn't have slavery here, and in fact, in my lifetime, it used to be that American Blacks would flee to France to live freely in France, Italy, because it was so much better. But now we're telling everybody that when it comes to identities, the Americans are the prophets of the world. And so it's also used to assert our moral superiority.
Yes.
I mean but you see, the cause of our moral superiority changes drastically over the years. But we're all better than the others.
We're always in.
It's not bad anymore. No. In fact, what's wrong with the Russians is they're a little too Christian, so that's out.
Right. So do you think that this is this movement in the way of spreading this type of identity politics and exporting it and so on? How does that relate to the World Economic Forum? And is the World Economic Forum dominated by US companies, by the tech companies? I mean, is that the dominant wealth? I'd like to understand like how this interfaces with the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. How do you understand that?
Well, you can go on the site and look under some of these organizations, and then you'll get a whole list of the companies that support them, and it's just about everybody. Deutsche Bank, PayPal, Google, of course, the high tech, the Silicon Valley high tech people, they are absolutely at the core of this, I think.
The very top of it. I mean, it's Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, and so on.
Right.
But I've always wondered if those are really the driving forces, if the driving forces are intelligence agencies, it's really hard for me to understand the whole, like what that is, what that World Economic Forum really is.
The revolving door. You see, some of these people go from companies to military firms to DARPA.
To intelligence agencies too, right?
Yes, intelligence. I mean, there are all kinds of contacts here, and individuals who circulate between these high-tech corporations, government agencies, et cetera. And of course, these companies are interested precisely in developing these gadgets that will improve us.
Yes.
And that is seen, you see, as this fourth industrial revolution is digital everything.
Yeah.
Which we already have too much digital. You can't get anybody on the telephone when you need them to explain a problem. All you get is which one of the wrong answers can you punch?
Mm-hmm. And the digital allows for surveillance also. There's no question about it. If we get digital everything, we'll have surveillance everywhere.
We have it just a lot of people are worried about surveillance. I'm less worried about surveillance than about some other of these things. I don't mind being surveyed right now, but of course I'm not up to anything. But
it's more on the censorship side that if you're surveilled pretty closely, there's closer censorship on what you can say because everything goes on the internet. And so, you can get canceled if somebody knows you've said something or that you've put some material into a blog or into it. So it's not as though, a small sort of feature is small anymore.
Yeah, but I see other things. That's true. But I see other things. They would have digital currency. Now, look, you can't give money to a beggar in the street anymore. You can't give an allowance to your child. It all has to be, you can't also, let's just say, cheat a little bit and pay somebody for some little job that is, right? Everything is, every move you make will be registered.
Yes.
And digital, all digital currency. So this digital everything means money. It means services. Already, I say, you can't talk to a clerk, to somebody at your bank or anything, because you have to go through all the click, 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 click. You can't find things out because it's all, the only answers you get are the ones that have been programmed. And if it doesn't apply, it doesn't apply. You just never find an answer. And that means firing people, massive unemployment. And yet the people behind us say, oh, we'll make new jobs. Sure, wonderful new jobs of designing a spaceship. I'm sure that I wonder how many million people are eligible for jobs like that. People who are not particularly educated. Goodness knows there's always a need for a good plumber and a good electrician. You may not have an advanced college degree. They're more useful than the people with advanced college degrees. But I mean, the people, a lot of people like to have a job.
I know, it's actually something. It's part of the meaning of life. So, the idea of universal basic income replacing jobs, that's another thing that it just doesn't make sense. It really is your work that allows you to find the meaning, because that's how you interact with other humans. Giving people money is not giving them really anything. I mean, they may be able to buy things, but in terms of finding purpose, finding meaning, finding social contact, being able to do something that's creative, to me, it doesn't make sense to, as you said, digitalize money, first of all, because all of that is, again, under the control of the people that run the internet or that deal with the digital side of things.
They can cut you off.
They can cut you off at any point. And so then, as some of the people say, well, so there'll be robotics doing surgery. You'll be wearing your digital medical device, so you won't need a doctor. You'll be wearing your nutritional medical device so that you won't need to think about what you eat. It'll say today you need to eat this much protein or whatever. But what's eliminated there really is human contact and human meaning. Everything is just through a machine.
I think it's horrible. I think it's, you see, look, the basic income, what are people going to do with it? I have an idea. In this neighborhood, a few blocks up there, there's a park, which is very beautiful park made for people with strollers and children and so on. And half of it now is occupied by crack drug addicts.
Oh.
And so when you have this basic income, what is to prevent you spending it on drugs? And when people have no purpose in life, when they can't do anything, when they have no social role, and that's probably the case already with a lot of these people who are crack addicts, is they're already not into the work life.
Yeah.
And I think that there should be programs to take care of these people and get them off the drugs and get them into something useful, right?
Yes, yes.
And instead, this is growing, and at the same time that this problem is growing, they're talking about a universal income, which would only make that problem worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can see what you mean. And so the idea, the idea that's in this statement about improving things for human beings, it's the same. I mean, I don't know how much I want to make an analogy with the final solution of the Nazis, that they were going to perfect people by breeding them differently. But there's some kind of analogy that when you make the mistake of trying to perfect humans, or you try to kind of act like God, you're going to be the designer. You're going to do it the way that the human ego thinks it should be done. When you make that mistake, it's a very big mistake. It always leads to oppression, death, abuse. You're always having to get rid of something that is just human. And that is, thought of then, it's rationalized that there's no problem getting rid of, for example, ordinary jobs or small shops or small businesses, no problem, because we'll have universal basic income. But like you said, universal basic income can lead to universal depression and drug use. And so that mistake of trying to design something and perfect it seems like it's a mistake that's being made again through this World Economic Forum.
Well, I think, you see, in some ways, I think this has happened almost accidentally. Let me put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of advances, which I won't condemn at all,
Mm-hmm.
in medical technology. I can't condemn them really, because I'm a victim of it.
Yeah, me too.
I wear a pacemaker because of my arrhythmia. I don't particularly like wearing a pacemaker, but it is an intrusion into my body by technology.
Mm-hmm.
But it is there to correct an anomaly, my heart beating too fast. And so a lot of technology has been, that is intrusive about the human being, has been to correct things that are wrong. I'm a normal, healthy person, but I happen to have this little thing, and so there. And other people have had, lost an arm, and they get, there is this technology to correct illness or mistakes. But with what have they developed? It has suggested to the technocrats themselves, aha, since we can do this to cure what's wrong, we can cure the whole human species, making them something else. I think they've slid into that, illusion that why stop now? Why stop with correcting things that are wrong? Why not just correct healthy, normal human beings and make them better? Well, of course, I think some of these ideas are very dangerous. But I also think that, like eugenics, it's not going, if there behind that is the notion of making certain people better, not everybody.
Yes, of course.
Of making a super race, of making, and I think these billionaires who dream of planning cities on Mars can have, they feel they should live forever, and they need enough technology, and so behind all that, while they say it's good for humanity, actually it means let's dump a lot of people into the universal basic income, and they can go have drugs. And meanwhile, we will use this to make a super race of extra special people who will live forever, or Well,
Yeah.
go
No,
on.
no. I mean that there is definitely the desire for immortality that's part of the Silicon Valley, particularly Google, coming up with various combinations of devices and substances and chemicals to produce a human that lives at least 150 years, but they're looking to live a lot longer than that, and maybe even immortality. But from my point of view, if you look at human history, going back even to Gilgamesh, and of course to the Greeks and so on, there's always this search for immortality. And it always is defeated by nature, because this world that we're in is a world of impermanence, limitation, life and death. You can't just live here forever. It's the second law of thermodynamics, or whatever you want to call it. Everything breaks down. So the idea that there are going to be some people in Silicon Valley who are going to overcome that, I don't believe it. But, in the meantime, it seems like it's causing so much vast confusion. And, why isn't it being stopped? Why aren't there more critics? And it's certainly, I mean, a lot of people say, well, how did Hitler kind of bring about what he brought about? Well, to some extent because it was hidden, because people didn't understand it, and some extent because he was charismatic and he appealed to certain people. And I think that the ideas that are behind breeding a master race have been around since humans, have been here. I mean, the idea of immortality or but usually there's criticism when you see it, when you can see it. Usually, there's some kind of massive reaction of that's in the past. It might be from religion, we can't be God, we're humans. So I don't know what's happening now. It seems like there's very little criticism.
Yeah, I don't like to compare things with the Nazis, because people are always comparing everything with the Nazis, which is the best thing that ever happened in history. And
Yes.
And after all, you have to realize that Germany lost a war it thought it was winning. It went
Yes.
there are very particular circumstances
Right.
to what happened in Germany. The situation is very different now, but I think there's a lot of confusion about of people. We're really not in a good cultural position. Our culture is very, very degraded. Let me say
Yes.
that. Our code, when my grandparents were alive, entertainment was, one of them sits down at the piano and they sing and they make up and they entertain themselves. Now our culture is all, we sit there passively and eat up ideological products, which teach us to be competitive, really males very male, women very male women, which also confuses people about if they don't fit the stereotype. Mm-hmm. Because we and the commercial culture is not, there are no really great writers, great this or that. There's a real decline, I think, because it's all commercial, and it often appeals to not the greatest impulses. We're overly sexualized society, which also I think leads to this gender thing, because the commercial society is very focused on sex as a sort of competitive sport.
Right, but though, even though, let's say on the level of images, pornography, sexual images and so on are very widespread and available, people are not having sex like they used to. Young people are
Mhm.
not having sex with each other because they may be masturbating, or they may be simply so alienated from other people their age. They're wrapped up with the TikTok, with online stuff or whatever, so that there isn't, we may be overly sexualized, but we're underperforming.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because well, it's so much detached from uh, from feelings, you know,
Yes.
from love, you
Yeah.
know. I
From
mean,
love.
what is that song? What's love got to do with it? Yes. What
Mm.
has love got to do with sex as a competitive sport?
Yeah.
Not a lot. And people can be alienated by that, and that can also push young people toward wanting to not be whatever sex is supposed to be, because they don't want to get into all that. Because
Yeah.
one of the aspects, of course, of this sex change is that it neuters people. And that's,
Yes.
I mean, you can't change sex in the sense of taking on the reproductive function of the other sex. No, you lose your own reproductive.
That's right.
And you don't get the other one.
That's
So,
right.
so if people, maybe they like this because this is perhaps a way, if it were massive enough, it would be a way to cut back on population, but it's not massive enough to do that. So I don't think that that's a motivation. I think the motivation is more that the transhumanism is what's behind this, the reality, and little children getting to be what they want is the advertising for it. It's a way to shut up criticism of it, because it's always human rights.
Right. Right.
The human right to be what you want as an individual, because this concept of human rights, as the West uses it, has no idea of social obligations,
Yes.
or of what is good for society, or duties or responsibilities. It's just what the individual wants to do. And so it's very, because that's the difference, because both communism and conservative society does think about the society as a whole and the welfare. But we're in this individualism where, well, the society, that it's just a product of what individuals want to do.
Well, you know, I don't know if you read Dave Eggers' The Circle, or if you saw the movie The Circle. It's a novel that's about the tech companies. It's sort of about Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, although they're not named. And so the idea is that all of this technology is set up in such a way that people are drawn to it. They want to use it for their medical reasons. They want to use it to improve their children's schools. And so they willingly put cameras on, they're surveilled, they willingly go to a digital money, everything. Nobody's making them do it. Each step of the way, they're being offered these things, and they take them on. And then finally, what these companies are calling closing the circle is that you would do all your voting on the internet, that voting on the internet would be the safest way to vote because it would protect your privacy. And so that's what they're pushing in the novel. They're pushing for closing the circle. So all of your activities plus your voting, everything will be digital, everything will be on the internet. And you follow the main character is a very idealistic young woman who goes to work for essentially Google. And her name is May. And she wants to help people, and she wants to make a better world. And she's the one that leads everyone further and further towards closing the circle, because she becomes this tremendous advocate for all of these things that will make better humans, that will make things better. But of course, that's not what's happening. And her parents go against it, her boyfriend goes against it, but she just drops them then. And I thought the novel came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It was very prescient because I see that people aren't being made to do these things. You know, you still can decide whether you want to, get more gadgets. I mean, it wasn't possible during COVID, though. For me, I had to work on Zoom. You know, even if I didn't want to work on Zoom, I would just not be able to work at all. But so I was forced to work on the internet at that point. But by and large, we are making choices. And there are some communities of people, even here in Vermont, that are off the grid. They're not on any technology. They're not on any internet. They don't have electricity. They have their own community with their wood stoves and their wells and their community. And that's it. They're not affecting the whole world. That is also a choice that people can make. But there's this sense that we're willingly going into some sort of degraded condition. Like you said, our culture seems more and more degraded. And what's really bothered me is that being a lifetime progressive myself and having seen the progressive movement as the most compassionate and the most thoughtful and the most I thought, okay, politics don't really make a big difference, but there's one side that actually seems more humane. And that's what I'm going to support. And I was always anti-war. Now it's been so confusing. My team has gone down. It's like my team lost, but nobody seems to want to talk about it. And so, my feeling is that particularly those of us who are anti-war, who are progressive, who did see, a way for humans to improve their humanity, that it's very important for us to push back on this.
Yeah, it's dreadful because a lot of the left, you say human rights, they gave up on, as I say, they gave up on equality in an economic sense. And now the fact is that the propaganda has really aimed at the left. The left has become the cheering session for wars because there's some dictator. And of course, dictator. The fact is, our democratic system is very malfunctional at this point.
Yes.
That's another subject I don't want to go into, but it's sort of obvious. We don't have much choice. We don't have much choice, and even if they make the machines, with the choice we have, what difference does it make? I mean, a lot of people, it doesn't make any difference. That's why so many people don't vote, and that's true here, and it's true in the West. I mean, our Western democracy is not in good shape right now. It is not. People feel there's no choice. And one reason they feel no choice is that the left in most places has vanished and become identity politics, where they're not looking to make a society where people are more congenial because they've got more in common but this very polarized society, which leaves a lot of people absolutely off taking drugs or something because they're out of it. And then these billionaires who shouldn't exist. And I'm not for taxing these billionaires. I'm for those companies should become public. Taxing them is recognizing their right to own all that, and they shouldn't have that right. These things like Google should not be the property of individuals. But you see, that's what I mean by equality. And people are totally distracted because they're being told all the time by the media that what really matters is equity. And you're all but just fixated on other people's skin color and gender. When I say this is, and it's destroying the left. That's why people don't vote for the left anymore. The devotion to identities is just not what people who used to vote for the left want it, and so they don't vote. And so the left parties everywhere are just vanishing.
So do you think there's anything that can be done other than the kinds of conversation you and I are having? I mean, these conversations are happening. They're happening usually on these little interview shows or podcasts or something. Some of those actual shows get taken off the internet too. They get canceled. But is there anything else that, I mean, I don't know if this thing has to just play its whole way out and it's going to destroy civilized societies.
Yeah, I worry about that. I indeed do worry about that, because I don't see an easy answer to this. I mean, what else can we do? I mean, we do what we can do. We talk.
Yeah.
We don't have the power of anything else. We do what we can do, and it's so. I don't know. I think, in fact, there's something to be worried about. I'm a little bit worried about. You see, there's also another possibility is simply that this is going to cause a very strong backlash.
Mm-hmm.
And the backlash may not be very nice either.
Right.
Because a lot of people are fed up with this. I mean, they really are. A lot of people they don't want to be told that they have to use this pronoun, or that they have to this or that, or that they have to feel guilty about white supremacy. They don't like that. And that can produce a very violent, especially in the United States, not so much elsewhere, but this, I think we may be heading for really a clash about this.
Like a civil war in the US.
A sort of civil war. I mean, not exactly a classic civil war, no, the army on this side, but just the generation of I think so, because, and the difficulty can be that the backlash will have its own faults, right?
Yes, of course.
And I mean, I do have a feeling about moderation in some things. I mean, like being moderate about, yes, there can be all these differences. So, accepting all these differences, but not making a fetish out of them.
Right.
I feel that moderation is being lost in another polarization, not the polarization of rich and poor, but the ideological polarization, which will lead to extremes on both sides. I mean, this articles that I saw about transgender Marxism, which is a fantasy notion. I mean, there's nothing Marxist about it at all. And some of the writing that we have to abolish gender in order to make the revolution. I mean, now this is like a red flag before the bull if you give this to conservatives. They'll go crazy. And I mean, a lot of this idea that a family is oppression. Well, these people apparently came from families where they felt oppressed, but a lot of people love their families, and they're there too. And so to make a war about whether you love families or should they be abolished, I mean, this is very dangerous. I think it's a very dangerous.
I was wondering, just to kind of think about this in a way that we can kind of bring it together. It seems like a lot of these ideas that we've been talking about are related to various initiatives through the World Economic Forum. You and I, when we talked earlier, said that is ultimately a group of people, and they won't be able to get along well themselves. No group of people gets along well and agrees on everything. And so they won't be able to quite bring about what they want to bring about, because they'll feud among themselves. But in the meantime, as you said, there's a chance that we're going to war with Russia. I mean, there's a chance that everything else will be subsumed under a war. And I wonder, it's so odd to me that people aren't paying attention to that. I wonder if that can't be the World Economic Forum. That has to be governments, right?
Yeah, I don't think they want a war. I don't think so. But on the other hand, you do have a society where we're now really, for the last few decades, finance capital has taken power, really.
Yeah.
And part of finance power is the military-industrial complex, because they can always make money off weapons. The government promises them. And this new fourth industrial revolution, it's also counting on this government to finance things, to subsidize things, to make tax breaks for them. So in fact, both this fourth industrial revolution and the military are kind of state capitalism things. The state is involved with, and it's there to help financial capital make profits. And,
yes.
And so this is dangerous in every possible way. And
yes.
I guess the only thing is we keep talking about it and hoping that enough people will react to this, and react in an intelligent, moderate way, not in an extremist way, not deciding that we, hate people because they're different, but rather that it's not a big deal. And that's not the main question.
Well, the thing that I think another element of this that you're pointing to is that capitalism is no longer just corporations, it's part of the government. I mean, it's state capitalism. So in the past, and even in the recent past, say with Bernie Sanders and, whom I supported, and with getting rid of the idea that a corporation was a person, that was one of the movements to try to, get rid of this notion that corporations could vote and could be represented as though they're persons. And at that point, which wasn't long ago, I thought, well, corporations are the problem. The government actually functions to support people and help the poor and so on. Now the corporations and the government are alike. And you get this particularly in medical. It's like the medical, including pharmaceutical, and the military. So it's not just the military industrial complex, it's the military medical industrial complex is a mix of the government and the corporations. And there doesn't seem to be wiggle room in there, for, let's say, something like democracy, for people to be able to choose things. So it almost seems like this system has to break down in order for things to change.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how to do it, but I think we can. Maybe we can stop on that, because I realize that I have a dinner engagement at this point.
Okay. So that's a good place. We'll close with, that it looks like the system is going to break down, but you and I would like it to do so in a moderate way.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, so thank you so much for meeting with me again. And, I'm a big fan of yours, and I love talking with you. I hope someday to meet you in person.
That would be great.
Yeah. Thanks, Diana. Bye-bye.